Let's look at Lesson 6, Activity 10. When the school orchestra discovered that they still had to raise $48, they decided to conduct a cookie dough sale. They bought cookie dough from the local dough company and sold it at $14 per bucket. And they made 4 times the amount of money they needed by selling 30 buckets of dough. How much did the orchestra pay the local dough company for each bucket? Okay, a lot of pieces here, and this isn't going to have just formulas that you can go Google search, right? You kind of have to figure this out on your own. So first of all, as I say, always start with what you're solving for. So we want to know how much they paid the local company for each bucket. So we're solving for cost per bucket. Now when I say that, I mean cost per bucket to the orchestra. We know they sold it at $14, but we want to know how much it cost them to buy it from the dough company. So cost per bucket is going to be equal to the total cost, right? The total cost spent to buy the dough divided by how many buckets there were. So for example, if I knew that it cost $300 to buy the dough and that there were 30 buckets, I could divide 300 by 30 buckets to figure out the cost per bucket. Now, the cost spent to buy the dough is another thing that I don't really know, right? It doesn't say they paid the company this much money. So I also have to figure out the cost spent to buy the dough, or the money spent to buy the dough. How am I going to figure that out? Well, that's going to be equal to the amount sold minus the amount raised. And by amount sold, let's keep going. By amount sold, what do I need? Amount sold is the cost per bucket, and in this case I do mean the cost to the consumer, the cost per bucket times the amount of buckets. Now the amount raised, or in other words, their profit, their amount raised is going to be it says they needed to raise $48, but they made 4 times the amount they needed. So we know they raised $48 times 4, right? They made 4 times what they needed to raise, and they needed to raise $48. Okay, so starting from here, let's work our way out of this. So, if they needed to raise $48 and raised 4 times that, we take 48 times 4 to get 192. So 192 is going to be our amount raised. So I'm going to erase this, and I'm just going to write in 192. Now what about amount sold? Well, we know that they sold them for $14 a piece. So it's going to be $14 a piece times 30 buckets. So $14 times 30 buckets gives us $420. $420. Okay, so they sold $420 worth. So let's erase this and write in $420. Okay, so again, I want to make this crystal clear. Amount sold is the actual cash they took in, right? But there's a difference between how much you sold and how much money you actually earn. If I sell cakes for a living, my profits aren't just what was in the cash register at the end of the day, right? Because I had to buy supplies, I had to pay employees, so really the amount you raise is much less than the amount of sales you might make. So while they sold $420 worth of merchandise, they only profited $192. Okay, So that means if they raised $420, if they sold $420 but only raised $192, that means they spent $420 minus $192, $228 buying the dough. They spent $228 buying the dough. So if they spent $228 buying the dough and there are 30 buckets of dough, that means our final answer is that they spent $7.60 for each bucket of dough. So that's not a bad profit, right? So for every $7.60 they spent, they got $14 back. So the cost per bucket is $7.60. Let's do one more. Jamal and his friends are conducting a car wash to raise money for a school play. Over the first weekend, they raised $336, which was 80% of what they set out to earn. If they collect $21 for each car they wash, how many more cars must they wash? Okay, let's unpile this a little bit. So, amount of cars that need to be washed, that's what we're looking for. How many more cars must they wash? So, number of cars they need to wash. How are we going to figure that out? Well, how much money do we need to raise, right? So we're going to say, well, that depends on the total money to be raised divided by cost per car. So if I know how much I need to raise and I know the cost per car, I can figure out how many cars I need to wash. So how much money needs to be raised? Well, the total money that they need to raise depends on their total earning, right? Depends on their total earning and the amount already raised. The amount earning and the amount already raised. So that brings us to another tier here. How would we figure out their total earning? Well, their total earning would be the amount raised over the rate of their goal. The amount raised over the rate of their goal. So what do I mean by that? I just mean that they raised $336, and if we divide that by the rate, which was 80%, we get $420. So $420 is their total earning. It's their total earning. So if I take that $420, I take that $420, and I subtract it from the amount they already raised, and that was told to us in the question, right? They said they already raised $336. That means that they still have $84 left to earn. They still have $84 left to earn. Now, if they need to raise $84, then I can start working on my final equation. So the number of cars they need to wash is equal to the total amount of money they need to raise, which is $84, divided by the cost per car, which is $21. So it looks like they still need to wash 4 more cars. Now, when I was writing this, I know it might have been a little confusing to see, well, where did you get these equations from? How did you know to set it up like that? It looks like I just pounded it out, boom, boom, boom. Of course, it takes a little bit of consideration, maybe some trial and error to figure stuff out. So you probably would have known, okay, well, they collect $21 per car. How many more do they need to wash? Then you would have asked yourself the question, well, how do I figure out how many more they need to wash? And naturally, you would have kind of gone through this question and trial and error process that would have led you to this. So I showed you the finished project, made it look a little bit easier, and kind of cut out some of the middle considerations. But questioning and answering yourself is just a good method to figure out these problem-solving skills. I always, again, start with what I need to find, ask myself what I need to find that, and it kind of opens up into a stair-step of, to find thing A, I have to find thing B, to find thing B, I need C, to find C, I need D, and so on and so forth. So I have all these kind of nested equations, and I work my way back out until I get the answer. Okay, so that's lesson 6, activity 10.